Monsoon has started in India. That means it is raining everywhere. Combine that with potholes, lack of infrastructure, and you get a lot of places for stagnant water, providing fertile breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Here you can see tornadoes of mosquitoes even before monsoon had arrived. This is an image from February this year, so you can imagine the situation now where there is a lot more stagnant water all over. That means viral diseases are, well, viral. I'm not making a case for antinatalism here, although one can be made, I think. I'm telling this because as a result of all of this, I am down with flu, and therefore, in this episode of Antinatalism this week, you would not be seeing my pretty face, which I'm sure you won't be missing anyway. Okay, so let's get started with a big one. David Benatar is going to appear in the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, also known as FODI, to be held in Sydney, Australia in the month of August. The festival is a 2-day event on 24th and 25th of August, and David Benatar will be talking about the case for not having children, why having kids dooms them to suffer on 25th of August at 1:45 p.m. and I presume that's local Sydney time. As is the case with Benatar, we don't expect to have a video recording, but it would be great if we can get at least an audio recording. Therefore, I urge everyone to email them at contact@festivalofdangerousideas.com and ask them to have an audio recording so that, those of us who cannot attend in person could actually listen to it. However, if you can also attend this event in person, you can buy a ticket, which is about $35, I assume Australian dollars here. There are also other discount plans if you want to buy more sessions. The link will be in the description. Stop Having Kids has a number of outreach events planned on 3rd and 6th of July in Boston, 12th and 13th of July in Detroit, 14th July in Mackinac Island in Michigan, and 31st August and 1st September in Ocean City, New Jersey. Also, they are planning on having an outreach event in Berlin, Germany in August. If you could help Dietz, one of the co-founders of Stop Having Kids, find an accommodation there, please email them at info@stophavingkids.org. Antinatalist Advocacy website now has 2 new pages. One is a career page listing opportunities where you can actually do some good, and another one is a criticisms page which also has links to criticism videos as well as some of the responses in Q&A format. This is just a reminder that Antinatalism Meetup Part 2 on Procreative Ethics is on July 8th, 2:30 a.m. Indian time, which I think is 7 July 5 p.m. Eastern time and 7 July 10 p.m. the UK time. It'll be an online event and the recording will also be shared later. There is a detailed PDF of the topics to be discussed. I'll put all the links in the description. Nimrod is finishing his 2nd European tour of antinatalism activism, and here you can see him arriving in London. Well done, Nimrod, and I hope people take inspiration from him to do more tours like these. The Sunday Morning Herald is the oldest and most read tabloid in Australia. They had a short article, "It's Not Selfish Not to Want Kids, It's Selfish to Have Them," by Kerry Sackwell. Now, Kerry is a mother of 3 children and she is claiming that it is selfish to have kids. She quite honestly explains why she had kids. She says, "I have had 3 babies and none were born of an act of altruism. Every time I had a child, I did so for me. I certainly didn't do it for the welfare of my unborn babies. They weren't sitting plaintively in limbo, waiting anxiously to be conceived." She goes through many other factors which had no part in her decision to have kids, and she's very honest about this. This brings out one important point related to both pronatalism and antinatalism. Many pronatalists today accuse antinatalists for the declining birth rates in the world. I have pointed out many a times in the past that the reason for declining birth rates are not antinatalism. Similarly, most of the people who do have children don't have them for the reasons of the country, GDP, economy, or to save humanity and so on. These are the reasons talked by many within the pronatalist movement, but most people don't care about this. They have children because they want to for some personal and usually some emotional reasons. Now, this is what I think, but I don't have a statistical evidence to that. We have seen surveys about reasons of people not wanting to have kids. It would be interesting to see surveys on the reasons why people do have kids. Part 2 of Julio Cabrera's Criticism of Benatar was published. Cabrera starts with 4 recurring characteristics of discussions among some philosophers. 1, arguers strongly defend their positions. They believe that that's the only truth. 2, they see other positions as false or dishonest. 3. They complain of being misrepresented by others. And 4. They never accept their own defeat. He takes excerpts from Benatar's papers and books to show that Benatar exhibits all of these characteristics. In other words, Cabrera accuses Benatar of taking a position that only his, Benatar's arguments are right and everyone else is wrong. Cabrera calls this argumentative optimism, a kind of Pollyannism which he says Benatar has used in his own works. Cabrera says to expose his pessimistic thesis, Benatar employs a completely optimistic logic of argumentation. According to Cabrera, some of the same biases we are subject to as human beings have also seeped into philosophical discussions. Even though Benatar's arguments might be logical, what it does with those is something that is not purely rational. When an arguer defeats opponent's viewpoint, it gives immense pleasure to the arguer. This is a psychologically driven phenomenon, and Benatar also seems to be affected by this. Now, Benatar has been open to criticisms and has engaged with critics extensively, but Cabrera says that his engagement and openness is only superficial. He does not actually engage on the level on which the real argumentation happens. If this was not the case, then he would have accepted at least some of the counter arguments, at least partially. But if you reject everything that your critics say, then you start to doubt if the arguer is actually engaging on the level of real arguments. Cabrera cautions about the basic structure of such philosophical discussions. Each arguer comes with 3 elements, he says. 1. Definition of the terms. 2. Certain axioms and premises. And 3. Mechanisms to draw inferences from those premises. Cabrera says not everyone uses same definitions, premises, and inferential mechanics. Because of this, our arguments are logically fragile. Still, we might defend them strongly because we might be emotionally attached to them rather than for the reasons of truth within them. He further says that the arguer can still defend his positions for 2 reasons. 1, the arguer is extremely convinced of the truth of his arguments, and 2, the arguer wants a rigorous examination of his arguments. Benatar seems to argue from the first position as he rejects all his critics. Cabrera gives another example of Benatar's approach of not considering the other party's perspectives. Benatar has specified in detail how our lives have so many discomforts to demonstrate poor quality of our lives. In reply to that, David de Grazia has pointed out that people generally are not focused on those discomforts. So there are 2 viewpoints. 1, while evaluating quality of life, we do not consider the fact that people are not focused on discomforts in their lives. Or 2, while evaluating quality of life, we do consider the fact that people are not focused on those discomforts, which helps them focus on something more important, and therefore in that way it helps to improve their quality of life. Cabrera says both viewpoints are valid, but Benatar is stubborn only on one of them. He gives other examples of Benatar rejecting his critiques by stating that they mischaracterize his claims. These include Thaddeus Metz, David Bunyan, Raphael McGregor, Emma Sullivan Bissett, and Christopher Belshaw. So Benatar accuses others of misinterpreting his claims, but he assumes that he, Benatar, perfectly understands what others are saying. This is what Cabrera calls as argumentative Pollyannism. He says Benatar's antinatalism is a pessimism based largely on the false illusions we have about ourselves and the quality of our lives. I simply broaden this to also encompass the domain of quality of our arguments and the false optimistic image we have about them. In other words, we have an optimism bias towards our own arguments, which can also include the arguments against optimism bias. Lastly, Cabrera clarifies what he means by argumentative pessimism. So let's consider a position that all arguments are right from the subjective perspective of the arguer. This is extreme relativism. On the other hand, we can say that only my argument is true and all other arguments are wrong. This is extreme absolutism. Cabrera says that the negative approach or argumentative pessimism is the approach where you don't prohibit criticism, but at the same time don't eliminate positions of others in absolute terms. He says that within the framework of definitions, premises, and inferential mechanisms, a certain conclusion would be objectively true. But if those definitions, premises, or inferential mechanisms are changed, a different conclusion would be drawn, and in that framework, that would be the truth. But Cabrera denies that this is relativism. He says the difference in the framework can appear through changes in perspectives, so his approach is perspectivism rather than relativism. This sort of approach reduces the strength of our arguments and hurts us, but so be it. If we accept Benatar's claim that life is unpleasant overall, then that would also include this domain of argumentation. Why should we be so positive about the truth of our pessimist arguments is the question Cabrera asks. With this said, I am not going to take sides or criticize Cabrera for the simple reason that I am not a qualified philosopher. But I have some documentation where Benatar talks about his way of engaging with his students. He says, there are a number of potential costs of my defending specific views. First, students might confuse my arguing for the same conclusion as an indication that I am not open to alternative view. Second, students may feel reluctant to defend alternative views in their essays and exams. There are a number of steps I take in order to ameliorate these problems, even though they cannot be avoided entirely. I indicate that I have changed my mind on some issues, and I sometimes explain what led me to change my mind. I tell the students that I would change my mind yet again if I were persuaded that my current views are wrong. I show which arguments against my position are strongest and why. Sometimes each view has both strengths and weaknesses, and the question is which set of strengths and weaknesses one thinks is best or least bad. I show that it is sometimes the case that reasonable people could disagree in this judgment. Finally, and I think this is very important, I emphasize that I have failed papers that support views I hold because they defend those views poorly, and awarded first-class passes to essays defending opposite views because they defend those views as well as they do. There was an article in New York Times about a lawsuit against Japanese government challenging the onerous requirements to get sterilized, titled, "In Japan, these women want to opt out of motherhood more easily." It says in Japan, women who seek sterilization procedures like tubal ligation or hysterectomies must meet conditions that are among the most onerous in the world. They must already have children and prove that pregnancy would endanger their health, and they are required to obtain the consent of their spouses. That makes such surgeries difficult to obtain for many women and all but impossible for single childless women. But these women are fighting against these laws. The article presents detailed profiles of plaintiffs and also opinions of their lawyers. We know that birth rates in Japan are far lower than the replacement rate of 2.1 children per woman, and Japanese government is trying some tricks from pronatalist books, so things are even harder for lawsuits like these, but it is unethical to see women as baby-making machines or even deny men of vasectomies if they haven't had children. We hope that they succeed in changing this archaic law in Japan. There's a news that Russia is planning to ban the extremist child-free ideology. Now, what exactly would it mean, what things are banned, and what are the punishments, etc. is still not clear. But they are planning to table a bill in this regard. Russia's Deputy Justice Minister is quoted saying, "We are now actively preparing a bill to prevent the spread of child-free ideology. One should not be able to promote ideas that nowadays girls, especially young ones, do not need to give birth. They can do without children." Mati Hairi produced another excellent episode with serious philosophical content about antinatalism. He has been writing about antinatalism for over 2 decades, but with Amanda's help, he has been producing excellent philosophical content online more recently. In this video, Mati proposes his position as voluntarily extinctionist antinatalism, or VEXAN in short, meaning he is an antinatalist. He would be pleased if others adopt this position, and if that results in extinction, he is ready to accept that consequence, or in fact even be happy for that, but he does not want this to be done forcefully. He also provides 2 justifications for this. First one is suffering, and under this he says not only humans but other animals bred in factory farming are also included. He is not so confident about wild animals though, as it would require human intervention, and we might not be so sure of the actual consequences of such intervention. The second is manipulation. Children remain the object of parents' manipulation right from the start. They are an instrument to satisfy the desires of their parents. This also includes other animals, those who are bred in factory farms, but also the pets which are bred for various purposes and hence are objectified. But again, on this view, he is not confident on wild animals because human intervention, in fact, would mean some kind of manipulation in the lives of those wild animals. He also goes through objections for these views and addresses them. From those objections, we can derive some pro-natalist alternatives. Mati addresses them as external and internal. External alternatives meaning those which are selective pro-natalism, either in time or in certain groups or geographies, that is in space. Internal alternatives are involuntary extinctionist antinatalism, or non-extinctionist antinatalism, or anthropocentrism, which is human centrism. Mati talks about the tensions between his extinctionism and his antinatalism and the reasons why there is a tension between the two. He also asks the question that if sterilization of stray animals like feral cats is okay, then how is it different than sterilization of wild animals? Finally, he leaves with an open question. Does a VEXAN, that is voluntarily extinctionist antinatalist, have to be vegan and vice versa? Marcus TLTO has published a paper called Best to Possibly Not Be, a Prudential Argument for Antinatalism. He claims to propose a new argument which starts from euthanasia. The logic is if euthanasia is morally allowed, then that means there are some cases for whom non-existence is a worthy choice to existence. If this is true, then there could also be some cases for whom the choice of not coming into existence might be better than coming into existence. Such cases are those whose life would not be worth living after they have come into existence. However, we can only know about that after that person has experienced the life which was not worth living. By that time, it is too late. So if there is a likelihood of such a life, then just mere presence of such likelihood is enough to not start that life. Marcus says that this argument is different than Heire's risk argument. Mati Heire's argument is based on the worst possible scenario, whereas Marcus is basing it on the likelihood of suffering in life such that it makes that life not worth living. But since that can only be known after it has been experienced as such, and since by then it is too late to go back, he says it is prudent to not start such a life in the first place. He then presents the case that such a likelihood exists in case of all lives. At the minimum, he says, we know that we guarantee suffering, but cannot guarantee a life worth living. There was a video which included some kind of panel discussion on a news channel in Japan called Abema News. This is worth noting as it is a big channel with over 1.5 million subscribers, and Masahiro Morioka was also one of the panelists. As we all know, Masahiro is a philosopher and has written on the topic of antinatalism in the past. But it looks like they have misrepresented the view of antinatalism as an extremist view stemming from personal psychologies. I don't understand Japanese, but Asagi Hozumi has done the excellent job of analyzing what happened in that video in his new blog post. He very strongly criticizes the way these arguments were presented, or rather misrepresented, to the channel's large audience, and how even Masahiro Morioka could not rescue the damage that was done to the case. Marcus Dredge has a channel called The Species Barrier, and a few years ago, David Benatar also featured on that channel. This week, we had a new interview of Chris Packham, who is a famous British TV presenter of programs focused on animals. Chris himself has not had any biological children. His reasons are more inclined towards environmentalism and population matters, but it's still great when TV celebrities talk about these subjects. A lot of antinatalist videos came out this week. Here is a quick run through. A video, Why Having Kids is Morally Wrong According to Schopenhauer, explained the connection of Schopenhauer's philosophy and antinatalism. An episode of TRTNLE, The Right to No Longer Exist podcast, was released where Kevin and Alex discussed antinatalism and its intersection with the right to die movement. There was an interview of Shweta Ramkumar, who is Childfree and an antinatalist. There was also a video which talked about antinatalism in what I think was Arabic language. Looking at the translation of the transcript, it looked like it was a pro-antinatalism video, but if you happen to know the language, please let me know in the comments. Tamil is one of the many Indian languages, and there was a video in Tamil, Is a Child Necessary? Exploring Antinatalism. Lawrence Anton and John Williams discussed about building a healthier antinatalist community, which, given the diversity of opinion just within the minority fringe community of antinatalists, is a challenging task. Lawrence also had another episode of his Antinatalism Around the World series, this time with Tufan, who is a philosopher at Belkent University in Turkey, and Cansu Ozge Osman, who is the translator of David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been in Turkish language.